The intellectual culture contemporary with Avicenna. Intellectual culture in the Central Saurasian Empire. Karl de Vaux, in his monograph Avicenna 13, furnishes particularly striking comments, as follows, p. 156. The more we investigate the enormous literary output of the Arabian Empire, and come into an intimate appreciation of the masterminds of the Middle Epoch in antiquity, the more we become aware of their sincerity. We should, we think, offer our salutations to these great personalities of that day, whose works and lives were equally encyclopedic. Our times do not show more worthy figures. We complacently assume that there are no more worthy than ourselves because science, so greatly developed today, cannot be held all within one single head. That may be. But it is only right to admit that science has less unity and harmony today than formerly it had, that it is less pure than it was under the grand peripatetic discipline. Our attitude towards that is neither humble nor sincere. In these days we are concerned too much to have our name blazoned forth than to grasp a great extent of science. We are more anxious to uphold the profession than to have a passion for study. We seek titles and reputation rather than real knowledge. To appear more specialistic than our ancestors, we expose ourselves to the judgment of posterity as having smaller minds and fettered souls. As to the state of civilization in the Western Saurasian Empire, we have the very illuminating description of Amir Ali in his The Spirit of Islam 2, p. 392. The Arabs covered the countries where they settled with networks of canals. To Spain, they gave the system of irrigation by floodgates, wheels, and pumps. Whole tracts of land which now lie waste and barren were covered with olive groves, and the environs of Seville alone, under Muslim rule, contained several thousand oil factories. They introduced the staple products, rice, sugar, cotton, and nearly all the fine garden and orchard fruits, together with many less important plants, like ginger, saffron, myrrh, etc. They opened up the mines of copper, sulfur, mercury, and iron. They established the culture of silk, the manufacture of paper, and other textile fabrics, porcelain, earthenware, iron, steel, and leather. The tapestries of Cordova, the woolen stuff of Murcia, the silks of Granada, Almena, and Seville, the steel and gold work of Toledo, and the paper of Saliba were sought all over the world. The ports of Malaga, Carthage, Barcelona, and Cadiz were vast commercial emporia for export and import. In the days of their prosperity, the Spanish Arabs maintained a merchant navy of more than 1,000 ar. If they had factories and representatives on the Danube. With Constantinople, they maintained a great trade which ramified from the Black Sea and the eastern shores of the Mediterranean into the interior of Asia, reached the ports of India and China, and extended along the African coast as far as Madagascar. During the 10th century, when Europe was about in the same condition that Caffraria is now, enlightened Moors, like Abul Qasim, were writing treatises on the principles of trade and commerce to supply an incentive to commercial enterprise and to further the impulse to travel. Geographical registers, gazetteers, and itineraries were published under the authority of government, containing minute descriptions of the places to which they related, with particulars of the routes and other necessary matters. Travelers like Ibn Battuta visited foreign lands in quest of information and wrote voluminous works on the people of those countries, their fauna and flora, their mineral products, their climate, and physical features with astonishing perspicacity and keenness of observation. The love of learning and arts was by no means confined to one sex. The culture and education of the women proceeded on parallel lines with that of the men, and women were as keen in the pursuit of literature and as devoted to science as men. They had their colleges. They studied medicine and jurisprudence, lectured on rhetoric, ethics, and belles lettres, and participated with the stronger sex in the glories of a splendid civilization. The wives and daughters of magnates and sovereigns spent their substance in founding colleges and endowing universities, in establishing hospitals for the sick, refuges for the homeless, the orphan and the widow. Cordova, the most celebrated Western university of the empire at the time of Avicenna, is well known as an instance of the high degree of culture of the day. Amir Ali, too, speaks of that wonderful kingdom of Cordova, which was the marvel of the Middle Ages, and which when all Europe was plunged in barbaric ignorance and strife alone held the torch of learning and civilization bright and shining before the Western world. The greatness of the city is indicated by its population, which is given by Heiser 26:1,662 as 300,000, and by Campbell 12, p. 57 as 1 million, and by the library of about 200,000 volumes. To see the city today, traversed as it can be from wall to wall, within half an hour on foot, and to read of an extent of 24 miles one way, and 6 m the other, shows that the word kingdom conveys a truer idea of its greatness. To read of innumerable libraries, 3,800 mosques, 60,000 palaces and mansions, 200,000 houses inhabited by the common people, 700 baths, 80,000 shops, besides hostels and serai, is to wonder how so much can have come to be now represented by so little. Nevertheless, the Grand Mosque alone, which is still at any rate externally intact, stands sponsor for the rest. And no doubt many of the existing imposing buildings, now devoted to very different uses, stand for the palaces and mansions. As to the literary treasures, these have been traced at least in part from Spain to J. as shown by Home, with Araud el-Khandis as his authority. And he then points to years of pilfering from the library of the great Mosque of El-Karouiyah at Fez, as having scattered these works forever out of Kentucky. A study of the street names and even the place names and current dialect in Moorish Spain today also confirms the story of past greatness. But the mystical knowledge displayed in the dispositions of the decorative designs and their poetic inscriptions on the walls of the Alhambra halls, staterooms, and private apartments can leave no doubt of unsurpassed artistic power, where every sense impression was deliberately drawn on. Lights and shadows, and colors changing with the hours of the day. Musical effects of simultaneous diversity of disposition of flowing water perfumes. Courting of the prevailing breezes. Interior architectural form. And furnishings, animate and manufactured, all these were combined for the achievement of a perfect representation of beauty. Among the Chinese, the bearing of Chinese philosophical thought on the subject of Avicenna lies in the fact that we here meet with a notable example of the intimacy of relation between world conception and medicine. The writings which are so carefully studied today by so many sinologists were extant at the time of Avicenna, and are still held in the highest esteem by Chinese thinkers. The modern Chinese philosopher is supposed to say to the Westerner, "What is the reason for which you deem yourselves our betters? Have you excelled us in arts or letters? Have our thinkers been less profound than yours? Has our civilization been less elaborate, less complicated, less refined than yours? Why, when you lived in caves and clothed yourselves with skins, we were a cultured people." The attitude towards Western learning so displayed may be blamed by many bushels. He is certainly praised by those who have studied philosophy most deeply. As long ago as 1876 we read conclusive evidence that much of our vaunted civilization came from that ancient race. If some students discuss their philosophy with a certain cynicism, others see into the justice of their conceptions. As Carus remarks, we need not be blind to the many errors and absurdities of the ancient occultism to understand and grant the truth that underlies its system. These words are exactly applicable to the canon of medicine of Avicenna. It should be added that errors and absurdities are apt to be ascribed to ancient authors which arose from misunderstandings and ignorance on the part even of contemporary pupils. The subsequent generations perpetuated the errors, and even in these days the attempt to represent the real meaning of ancient texts by translations exposes one to unexpected extraordinary pitfalls. Our idiom is so diverse from the technical Chinese. Every dwelling place, even if it has been blessed ever so long, will one day become a prey.